What often happens in midlife is the body becomes less tolerant of that pace, sleep is more fragile, recovery can take longer, and certainly stress lands differently. Many people interpret as their body breaking down. It's often the body becoming more sensitive to the condition it's living in. So that sensitivity is actually important feedback. It's the body's way of signaling that the systems that support health, things like sleep rhythm, stress recovery, nourishment, and support, may need more attention during this stage of life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Medicine with Meaning. I'm Dr. Julie Taw, and I'm so glad you're here. In our last episode, we talked about designing your health ecosystem, how our nervous system, biology, daily rhythms, relationships, and sense of meaning all interact to shape our well-being. Today, I want to talk about something many people experience at some point in their lives, what I often think of as a midlife reset. It's the moment when the pace and patterns that once worked start to feel different in our bodies. Energy changes, sleep shifts, stress lands differently. And many people begin to realize that they've spent years caring for everyone else while slowly drifting away from the rhythms that support their own health. But the stage of life isn't a breakdown. It can actually be an invitation to listen more closely to your body and to begin shaping a life that supports your well-being in a deeper way. So today we're going to explore what's really happening during this stage of life and how it can become an opportunity for renewal rather than something to fear. So let's dive in.
Hi, Dr. Julie. It's really nice to speak to you again. This is a really exciting topic. I've heard many people describe midlife as the moment when their body suddenly feels different, energy shifts, sleep changes, stress tolerance changes. From a physiological perspective, what's happening during this stage? Why do people feel like this?
Yeah, certainly many people describe midlife as a moment when their bodies suddenly feel very different. Certainly sleep changes, our energy shifts, and stress that once felt manageable starts to feel heavier. From a physiological perspective, several systems in the body are changing all at the same time. So for women, the hormonal transition of perimenopause is certainly a part of that. And estrogen and progesterone don't just affect reproduction. They interact with the brain, the nervous system, sleep regulation, metabolism, and our stress response. So when these hormones begin to fluctuate, many people notice changes in sleep, mood, temperature regulation, and energy. But hormones are only one piece of the picture. Midlife is also when the body begins to feel the cumulative effects of years of stress, responsibility, and constantly operating at a high pace. And certainly for many women, they've spent decades caring for families, building careers, and holding everything together. So the nervous system may have been running on a sustained high output mode for a long time. And what often happens in midlife is that, the body becomes less tolerant of that pace. Sleep is more fragile. Recovery can take longer. And certainly stress lands differently. So what many people interpret as their body breaking down, it's often the body becoming more sensitive to the conditions it's living in. So that sensitivity is actually important feedback. It's the body's way of signaling that the systems that support health, things like sleep rhythm, stress recovery, nourishment, and support, may need more attention during this stage of life. So in a sense, midlife isn't just a hormonal transition. It's a moment when the body begins asking for a different way of living.
And why do so many women reach this phase feeling like they've spent years prioritizing everyone else while losing connection with themselves?
Well, because they have. I think many women arrive at this stage because for a long time they've been living inside roles that ask a great deal of them. So during the earlier decades of adulthood, many women are balancing multiple responsibilities all at once. Building careers, raising children, supporting partners, managing households, and sometimes even caring for aging parents. So there's this constant orientation towards keeping things running, making sure everyone else is okay. And over time, that outward focus can quietly become the default way of living. And usually it's not a conscious decision, to lose connection with yourself. I mean, I can certainly relate to that. It happens gradually. And so your own rhythms, your creative interest, or simply having space to reflect often gets pushed to the side because your days are full and the needs of others feel more immediate. And, I think many women, are able to sustain this pace for many years, maybe because they're driven by love, commitment, a deep sense of responsibility. But in midlife, it's often a moment when something shifts. Life circumstances change, children become more independent, and I know the body starts asking for more rest, more care, or a different pace. And that's when many women suddenly realize that they've spent a long time responding to everyone else's needs without regularly asking themselves a simple question. What do I need now? So this stage of life can bring a kind of awakening, and not necessarily dramatic, but a quiet recognition that reconnecting with your own rhythms and well-being is no longer optional. And it becomes an important part of how you want to live the next chapter of your life.
I always wonder where all this energy comes from. Yeah, to sustain so much, because it really is a lot what most women are carrying every day. And I want to say that most women do it very well.
For sure. I think that it's that most women are incredibly capable and are very high functioning, and they do it with resilience for a couple of decades. And something starts to shift when you enter your 40s, and you do need to take better care of yourself. But yeah, where does the energy come from? I think youth,
Yes.
our bodies are more resilient. Maybe adrenaline, caffeine, unfortunately. And just, this, I think, deep sense of responsibility, especially when it comes to caring for young children. They need us in those early years. So it kind of isn't a choice. You just do it. You do it willingly and you do it with love.
Respect. And Dr. Julie, midlife would be as you enter your 40s. Am I right? Or mid
Well, I've
40s?
been kind of stretching it to 50s, but yeah, I would say your 40s, maybe 45, to be more precise. I think it also varies from person to person in terms of, how their bodies can adapt. And one person may start to feel these changes early on. Yeah, maybe even late 30s and early 40s. And somebody else may feel it in their mid to late 40s or even later. So there is a lot of individual variation. And that's certainly the case of perimenopause, where each woman experiences it quite differently. And that's probably related to the fact that each woman has a different ecosystem that they have created. And women who have carried a lot of responsibility and, sort of pushing and driving, they may feel more strain on their ecosystem and have more nervous system dysregulation, and they may feel the hormonal fluctuations of perimenopause compared to another woman who hasn't had the same load of stress or, practices yoga daily or, mindfulness. So there is a lot of individual variation.
And Dr. Julie, when you say that midlife isn't a breakdown, it's a recalibration, what do you mean?
So when I say that midlife isn't a breakdown, but a recalibration, what I mean is that the body is often asking for a different kind of support than it needed earlier in life. So again, in our 20s and 30s, many people can run at a very fast pace for a long time. And it's because our hormones are more stable. Our sleep is often deeper and more restful. And the nervous system can recover more quickly from stress. It's like the body has a bigger buffer. But as we move into midlife, some of those systems begin to shift. Certainly, our hormones fluctuate. Sleep becomes lighter. And this is something I've experienced personally. And the nervous system may become more sensitive to stress. So the margin for that constant overextension becomes much smaller. And, that fast pace and patterns that once felt sustainable may no longer feel that way. And that's where the idea of recalibration comes in. So instead of seeing these changes as the body failing, we can see them as the body asking for a different kind of alignment in how we structure our days, how we support our nervous system, how we nourish ourselves, and how we set boundaries around our time and energy. In a way, it's like the body becomes less willing to tolerate living on autopilot. And while that can feel unsettling at first, it can also be clarifying. Again, like an awakening, because it invites us to pause and ask a simple but powerful question. What actually supports my well-being now? And that process of adjusting how we live so it better matches what our physiology needs at this stage of life, that's what I mean by recalibration.
Yeah, it's so important to shift the way we think about season change and our bodies changing and growing. And I always wonder how much of it is biology just changing because you're growing, and how much of it is that you're might be tired as well. You reached a point where you just pushed all with all your force, and you drained everything that you have, and now it's like, hey, it's time, the body asking for for awareness. Like it's time to look at me in a different way. Like no more.
Yeah. I mean, luckily they kind of coincide, right? It's sort of like, I am done, focusing on the needs of everyone else. And, it's usually a time, um, if you have children when they're more independent, a lot of them are going away to college at this time. They don't need us as much, thank goodness. Um, and for sure, biology is changing. Certainly our hormones are changing. And that will impact, the entire ecosystem for sure. And so, it's never just one factor. It's, this entire ecosystem. And in some ways, I think of it as a blessing that our bodies are asking for us to be more sensitive to it, to listen more deeply, or to even pause. That's one of my favorite things is like pausing and noticing, because then you'll start to notice different things, but it allows us to, I think the pause allows us to go inward. And as I mentioned earlier, when we're in that busy, busy time, of raising kids and building our career, we're so outwardly focused. We're focused on the needs of everyone else that we don't even have time to stop and pay attention to our own needs. And so it's kind of perfect timing because when you listen to your own needs, well, one, you can take care of your health in this, ecosystem kind of way that we've been talking about. And I think the big opportunity is to align with what's important to us, what is meaningful. And I think that that's an important process in midlife and, can feel like a scary time, but if you align with what is meaningful, you're going to get it right.
Mhm. Yeah, and you've mentioned it before how it's empowering, and I see that. I see how it is empowering to be able to, recognize that you have needs and being able to express them to other people and putting yourself first is a different way, a different act of love. And I think that also teaches others. So, like I think it embodies wisdom as well.
Yeah.
And and that teaches others as well.
For sure. And that's the beauty of aging is that it usually comes with wisdom if you're self-reflective. But I would say you don't have to wait till midlife to do this work, right? And, I wish my younger self knew this, that, self-care is not selfish. I think that's a common theme that I've been sharing. And, it's really important for us to take care of ourselves in this deeper way early on.
And Dr. Julie, you've shared a little bit about your experience with us in previous episodes, but in terms of midlife, and for those new to the podcast, can you share a moment in your life when you experienced a shift like this, when your body or circumstances asked you to pause and reconsider how you were living?
Yeah. I think when you experience, a health issue or, in my case, pain in my shoulder and the frozen shoulder, I've shared about that in the past. That was a moment to force me to pause and reassess, recalibrate. But I am in midlife right now. And I'm stretching it to like my mid 50s. And it is a beautiful place for me right now to think about, what ecosystem do I need to feel well day to day, to be aligned with, meaning and purpose. And, even though, I'm a physician who spends a lot of time thinking about health and well-being, I certainly have had moments where, I'm not paying attention to what my own body is telling me. And so it is just a practice of pausing and just connecting with my inner wisdom, or, what are the signals of my body, trying to tell me. Thankfully, I've been practicing this for a little while now, and I have learned to change my daily rhythm so that it is a little bit slower. And I'm at a point in my life where my children don't need me so much. So it's actually feels very empowering. And I like this stage. And I'm looking forward to developing more wisdom around not only what I need for myself, but how I can help my patients and others go through midlife feeling good, feeling like themselves, and understanding, what their ecosystem needs to feel good.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Julie. And I can see how, I mean, you've been through all of this that you've mentioned, reaching this phase where it's time to pay attention to myself, especially as a physician, because your work is to take care of others, not only just at home, your children, your partner, your parents, but also you dedicated your life to serve people. So,
You know, as you said that, I was just reflecting on the irony. It's just as a physician and a mom, I've gotten really good at taking care of others. And it took me a while to learn how to take care of myself. And I think, that was a big shift for me. And I think I've shared where early in my career, when my children were young, I just pushed and I, didn't know how to listen to my body, or I guess I just didn't listen. I was just like, you just push through and you ignore. And, when I realized that self-care is so important to show up in the way that I want to for my family, my patients, and that it's also a form of self-honoring, that made the difference. And sometimes self-care can feel like, oh, I should do this, I should do that. But when you shift it to, I'm honoring my body and what it needs, it connects with that deeper wisdom, and it becomes things that you want to do. Meditation, for instance, I think, early on, I always talk to my patients about practicing meditation. I would do it on occasion. I didn't love it. It was boring. And the shift for me was, it just allowed me to connect with my inner wisdom, and it just felt good to tune in to myself and, to tune into the part of me where I'm practicing, not listening to my thoughts and, letting them come and go, and just practicing. And now meditation feels good, and it's something that I want to do versus I should do. And so those are some of the shifts in my own approach to self-care.
this is valuable. Thank you, especially because you know you mentioned this is about wisdom. Reaching midlife and having this awareness that you're faced with, but also I like the fact that you had all the knowledge to understand your body. It's not a matter of not knowing. As you mentioned, it's a biological change that I'm sure that it also changes your brain. Yeah, not just your body, right? Because a lot of people may think perimenopause or these life transitions affect how you feel in your body. That people talk about temperature and how you experience stress and stuff, but I'm sure that it also changes your brain and the way that you see life.
For sure. I mean, since menarche, the start of our period, our brains have been I would say has benefited from estrogen. And then it starts fluctuating. And that can certainly cause all sorts of, mood changes, temperature dysregulation, hot flashes and night sweats. And then when we're in menopause and there's very little estrogen, that impacts our memory and our cognition. And so, your brain is operating in a way that you're not used to. And that addresses the, biology of the ecosystem. And, oftentimes, hormone replacement is a really wonderful support for women, certainly in menopause and sometimes in perimenopause. It's a little tricky depending on the woman, and what's appropriate for her. But, you certainly want to support the biology of the body. And that, can help, improve many, many symptoms of perimenopause and menopause.
And Dr. Julie, in your clinical work, what patterns do you see most often among women navigating this phase of life?
Yeah. So one of the things that I hear quite often from women in this stage of life, they'll say to me, I can't quite explain it, but I just don't feel like myself anymore. And when we start talking, they may describe subtle but meaningful shifts. Certainly their energy isn't as steady. Sleep is a major issue. It feels lighter or more fragile. And then stress that used to roll off their shoulders now lingers in their body longer. But what becomes even more interesting is the life context around those symptoms. So again, many of these women have spent years, sometimes decades, showing up for everyone around them. Again, many women have been building careers and raising families and caring for parents, or holding emotional space for others, right? That's something women do very well. And so they've been these incredibly capable women, but they've been operating at a very full pace for a long time. So by the time midlife arrives, what I often see is not one single medical problem. It's a moment when the body and life are both asking for a little more attention, a little more care, and sometimes an entirely different way of moving through the world. And when women begin to see that, when they realize this phase isn't just about symptoms, but about how their whole life has been structured, it can actually be a very meaningful turning point.
And I know we touched about it lightly a little bit ago, but some of it is biological and some of it is years of overextension. Because I know many people assume these changes are simply hormonal. So how does stress, low nervous system strain, and years of overextension also contribute to this?
Yeah, so hormones are definitely part of the picture in midlife, especially for women. But they're really only one piece of a much larger system. We know hormones interact closely with the nervous system, sleep regulation, metabolism, and the body's stress response. So when hormonal fluctuations begin during perimenopause, they're happening within the context of everything else the body has been carrying. And when we talk about that overextension, it's really a load on the nervous system. So it's biological, right? Our nervous system has a physiology, but there's also a psychological component too, right? I think, that overextension, you sometimes feel like you self-abandon. It's almost like, a psychological response. You sometimes develop resentment, and then that can trigger the nervous system beyond, the overextension. So it's complicated. And if someone has been living with a high level of stress for many years, constantly pushing, constantly responding to demands, that nervous system almost gets like a little fried and it becomes more easily activated and slower to recover. And that can affect sleep and cortisol patterns and blood sugar balance and of course inflammation. And all of those systems interact with the hormonal changes. So there's like a lot of layers. So what looks like just hormones, it's often hormones layered on top of years of accumulated physiological strain. And that's one reason why simply adjusting hormones doesn't always fully resolve how someone feels. The body often needs broader support, helping the nervous system settle, restoring daily rhythms, improving sleep, and, creating a little bit more buffer in your daily life. So, it just goes back to that whole ecosystem.
Yes, you've mentioned it so well. It's an ecosystem. It's the balance of different major areas of your life that play a big role in your health and well-being. So I guess that's why it feels complex for some people, but it's so empowering to know that the change that when we start becoming aware of these areas and working for them and with joy also, they start coming into balance and then everything slowly becomes balanced. It's not just tackling one thing, because getting better in one thing will also affect the rest.
Yeah. And it, doesn't have to be a major overhaul, taking one piece at a time. And even small shifts can have a major impact.
And we've spoken about hormones and uh, biology and different aspects of midlife, but what role does identity play in this stage when someone begins asking deeper questions about how they want to live the next chapter of their life or what they want to do, or maybe start thinking about new things?
Yeah. That's a really meaningful part of this stage of life. And it often doesn't get talked about enough. Um, I think we talked about that, this is an incredibly empowering stage for many women where, they can kind of put aside all the hats that they wore, earlier in their adult life and start focusing on their own needs and, what kind of structure do they need in their daily rhythms, support, nourishment, relationships so that they can feel good, so that they can experience well-being. And so, I think the first, for me, I'll speak personally, gosh, it feels like the last 20 years of my life flew by so quickly. Um, maybe that's that autopilot, right? You're just like doing, and it was so busy and I don't know, it just moves so quickly. Like my children were babies and toddlers and now, they're going to be going off to college soon. And, I think what midlife has allowed me is just, it's slowing down and it's created a natural pause in that momentum. And, it's just been really, really, wonderful. And in this space, I think many women begin asking questions that they didn't have time to consider before. So questions like, what do I want to do with the next chapter of my life? What do I want it to look like? What brings me a sense of meaning or fulfillment now? And how do I want my days to feel? And I don't think these are questions. I know I didn't ask these questions in my early adulthood. And it is nice to pause and ask these kind of questions. So identity begins to shift from being defined mostly by roles, what we do for others, and it moves towards something more personal and intentional. And that process of reflection can be incredibly powerful. And I would say when people begin reconnecting with what truly matters to them, it often influences the choices they make about how they spend their time, um, how they connect with others, what they do for their health, how they manage their energy. So in many ways, midlife becomes less about losing something and more about rediscovering who you are becoming. And it is just exciting to, become that wise self. I find that very exciting.
And Dr. Julie, in our last episode, we talked about the idea that health is shaped by an entire ecosystem, not just one factor. How does this midlife reset often signal the parts of the ecosystem that need more support?
Midlife is often the stage of life when people begin to see how interconnected their health really is. Someone might initially think they have a sleep problem or an energy problem or their hormones must be off. But when we step back and look more broadly, we often see that several parts of our life has gradually drifted out of balance. We see that important daily rhythms become irregular. All that responsibility and output creates a lot of, stress on our nervous system, and we don't have much built-in time for recovery. And this takes a toll quietly over the years. And certainly we talked about how there's not much time to reflect, during those busy years. And so, I think it's really wonderful that midlife has a way of kind of allowing us to bring all of these things into clearer view. And it's not because the body is suddenly breaking down, but it becomes harder for the system to keep compensating for those patterns that may have been out of alignment for a long time. So what many people experience as a midlife reset is really the body and life asking for a kind of rebalancing, an invitation to look at how the different parts of their health and daily life are interacting. And that's where the ecosystem perspective becomes so helpful. So instead of focusing on one symptom at a time, it encourages us to step back and strengthen the overall conditions that support well-being. I keep talking a lot about the rhythms of the day, the nervous system, the boundaries around our energy, and of course, the things that give life meaning.
And Dr. Julie, what does it look like when someone begins strengthening their ecosystem, their rhythms, boundaries, nervous system regulation, and of course, sense of meaning?
What's interesting is that it usually doesn't start with dramatic changes, and it often begins with small shifts that bring the system back toward steadiness. So someone may start protecting their sleep more intentionally. They may begin creating a little more space in their day for recovery rather than, constant output. Sometimes it involves setting clearer boundaries around time and energy, which can be very challenging, but can also be incredibly freeing. And very often people begin reconnecting with what brings them a sense of meaning, whether that's creativity, relationships, service, learning, or simply having more presence in their daily lives. And that's no small feat, to be fully present. I think, most of us live in that autopilot. I know I did. And what's important to understand is that when these parts of life start supporting one another, the body, our biology, often responds. So our energy becomes more predictable, stress feels more manageable, sleep improves, and people feel more like themselves again. And that's really the essence of strengthening the ecosystem. And it's not about optimizing every metric or chasing perfection. It's about creating conditions where the body and mind can function in a more regulated, supported, and sustainable way.
And Dr. Julie, for someone listening who recognizes themselves in this transition, what is one gentle place they could begin with this week?
That's a beautiful question, because when people hear a conversation like this, it can sometimes feel like, oh, there's so many things to change, right? It's overwhelming. But the truth is, you don't have to change everything at once. A very gentle place to begin is simply to start noticing your rhythms and how your body feels within them. For example, you might ask yourself a few simple questions this week. So, when during the day do I feel more steady or clear? When do I feel more depleted? Where in my day might I need a little more space for rest and recovery? Often, the first step towards strengthening your well-being ecosystem isn't doing something dramatic. It's simply reconnecting with your own signals again. So, that might mean protecting your sleep a little more carefully, stepping outside for a short walk when your nervous system feels overloaded, or giving yourself permission to pause instead of immediately pushing through. So small shifts like that may seem simple, but they begin rebuilding something very important, and that's a sense of self-attunement. And once you start listening to your body more closely, it becomes much easier to make decisions that truly support your health going forward. This stage of life is actually one of the reasons I created the Wellbeing Ecosystem program. Over many years of practice, I saw that people didn't just need information, they needed a way to support their whole system. So the program is a 6-week guided experience where we work through the pillars we talked about: nervous system regulation, biological health, daily rhythms, relationships and boundaries, and reconnecting with meaning. The goal isn't dramatic transformation. It's steadiness, more predictable energy, a calmer stress response, clearer boundaries, and a deep sense of self-trust. If today's conversation resonates with you and you'd like to explore that work more deeply, I'll be sharing more details about the program soon. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can visit www.julietawmd.com or send me a DM on Instagram at julie.taw.md. I truly love hearing from listeners, and all questions are welcomed.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Medicine with Meaning. Midlife isn't an ending. For many people, it's the moment when they begin living with greater clarity, alignment, and self-honor. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who may be navigating their own reset. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.